let's also focus on the reconciliation meeting. It's taken them 48 hours. I mean, 2 days of constant meetings. The first one lasted for at least 6 hours to reconcile these issues. And then we understood that the meeting continued the following day. Yesterday, they came out, the minister of, the coordinating minister of the economy had this to say. She says that we just want to say that, or I just want to say that this reconciliation is still an ongoing matter. But we thought at this point in time, after working till last night, we should share with you some of our thoughts and clarifications on the issue. She says what we have done so far shows that $49.8 billion, and that's the first point we want to make. There are some perhaps misconceptions or misunderstandings that led to this figure, and we'll be able to come to the conclusion that we can account for this amount. Now, what I'm trying to point out here is the fact that she says that this reconciliation is still an ongoing matter. It does raise questions, doesn't it, for you?
Not really. See, look, every day agencies have to reconcile activities within themselves. If you look at how, if you've ever worked in any major agency or understand how they work, and you know that's why we call it civil service. It goes through so much paperwork, so much, and so sometimes they normally do have reconciliation meetings. You would expect that normally the central bank and the Ministry of Finance are always verifying their figures most of the time with each other. You remember the last time we had a discussion around the budget here? When I said to you that you can get figures, sometimes we rely on the World Bank figures, rather than, because you get one separate one from Ministry of Finance, one from the Budget Office, one from the Central Bank. It's been an ongoing issue in the whole country. That's way back, like the last, as I can remember, way back from
which was also something that came out during the subsidy probe. I don't know if you
exactly.
If you
you saw what went on. They went back to reconcile figures. I've asked, let us focus on the major issue. The constant issue is that are there no regular exchanges where we can just exchange figures? Because you will find this whole problem always coming up every now and then. What the CBN as an institution, because sometimes I think we focus on the individual, did was that their understanding of the whole thing, within the fact that oil theft was predominant, there were issues, they will naturally say, do I want to trust this NNPC? Are you following me? And then they go ahead to the president. That is not to excuse the processes and the practices based on what we know publicly.
You know, I like the way you put it, because you also publish works, so that's why even here on Channel Television we'll be very careful not to actually personalize it. We're talking about the CBN, not the head of the CBN. We're talking about the NNPC and not the head of the NNPC.
Correct.
But if this hadn't actually come to the public, perhaps we would have actually been piling this up and up with different figures. Now we're trying to look at how we can actually get, reliable figures, data as to what is happening economically, especially because it's the same thing. Sometimes we go on and we talk about 150 million strong Nigerians. In another place we see 180, 174. We don't even know how many we are. So we don't even know how much is going and how much is unremitted. So how has this now finally been resolved with all of these agencies and parastatals coming together? Have they finally been able to say this is the way to go when we need any figure? Just a click, we'll be able to get it?
That goes to the point what Marquez was making. We run a system whereby we move around crisis, where we prompt ourselves only on crisis. You said it. The letter was there September. The parties are known. But when the crisis came up, we moved, we resolved it. Take your mind back to the issue about the fuel subsidy. We didn't reconcile it until the crisis came up. If you look at over time, whenever we reconcile things, it's because
there's a crisis.
And the crisis is engineered. But that is what I'm saying, that we should go back and understand that we should be grateful for this problem coming out, rather than pick sides or choose whatever. It helps us to understand that governments do not reconcile. Because I'm asking myself, if you're going to be running the country and yet your central bank does not have a clear idea of the revenue that is available to it, or what is available in the Federal Board of Inland Revenue or in DPR, what figures are you using to plan?
That's the question.
Therefore, you are using estimates? Okay, fine. Let us just assume that the reconciliation has taken place. And you say the money is in Federal Board of Inland Revenue. Whose account? How come the CBN doesn't know? If the money is with DPR, how did it get there? How come it's not with the CBN? How come the CBN does not know? if the reply was given, sent to the presidency, and then this particular reply explaining the money was actually sent back to the CBN, and they still do not agree, then they continue discussion.
Because from your analysis, what I'm saying is that the CBN should have
there's only one list to the government
of the inflows and outflows, so they know where it's coming from and they know where it's going out.
It's not complicated. The oil business is a bit more complicated, but it's as simple as anything. You do joint venture. Who owns the NNPC government? So they do contracts, they leave for others, and so you know the structured finance. Money goes to DPI, money goes to inland revenue, tax on whatever. When they lift on behalf of others, it comes to you. When they leave domestic crude oil, money comes back. Who is the purser to the government? It can't be more complicated than that. We only have to maintain two accounts: the central bank account and the account we maintain with JP Morgan in New York. So who else receives money? Which other account does money go to? Because a government must be able to aggregate all these things together and put it back into the federation account.
At the end of the day, some heads must roll. But let's look at the impact of this disconnect between the agencies of government on the nation as a country, the image internationally, and even within.
I think concerning the agencies, I'm sure that the presidency and the secretary to the federal government is more competent to deal with those issues. I'll deal with one major problem. Imagine you're a foreign investor and you just heard that Nigeria has lost 7 trillion of his money, he can't account for it. Do you know so many things that are predicated on these revenue projections, our sovereign wealth fund, our credit standing, our ratings, our ranking? And then you come back on a Wednesday and then you hear that, oh, sorry, it wasn't 7 trillion, it was just 2 trillion missing. Either way, something is still missing. But in the first place, who do we believe? Just imagine the US Fed make a statement like that and it doesn't become something that you want to quickly trigger yourself upon. There are very substantial damage that has been done, and we must not lose sight of that. But the real damage we are doing is that we are not taking it very seriously to understand that we can't continue this way. We can't continue not knowing which figure is there, but we cannot just pin it and say, okay, fine, maybe the CBN should have been more conscious. But guess what? Within the context of what happened, the CBN acted because it was alarmed. Was it a false alarm? The fact that it wasn't reconciled and they said we knew where the money was tells me it wasn't a false alarm. You following me? It wasn't a false alarm. Then when you come out and say, oh, this is where the money was, how come the CBN does not know? Or are you therefore saying that the central bank is an incompetent institution? I beg to disagree. That's the whole purpose of the beauty of this country, whereby you have a central bank that's independent, that can say, I don't have the figures.
Oh, did you see the independence in all of this correspondence?
Oh, but of course. But of course, the NNPC therefore reports back to the government and said, no, we know where the figures are. Then the problem is this. CBN, Ministry of Finance, they said, look, all these monies, where do they go? And that's why you see, I think they're doing what they ought to have done in September.
What do you smell here? Because before now, one wouldn't dare see any head of
the resolution of the problem earlier on gave room to the fact that if such a letter was written and in 2 months no decision or resolution was taken, whoever did the task of releasing it in public for whatever purpose, therefore had the impetus. For if it was resolved, that letter is of no consequence. And there are countless of letters that have gone on between the president and the central bank governor, within ministers to the reporting head. But if that had been resolved, maybe sometime in October, the fact that
I'll ask Sulaiman's question more specifically. Do you smell it a cover-up?
Cover-up in terms of what?
I mean, because right now what we're seeing is a reconciliation. They're saying we know where the money is. We're not being told anything. I could hardly hear what the CBN governor was saying.
That's the beauty of having people like you continue to ask those questions. And I think you should continue to ask the questions. I will not go as far as say there is a cover-up. There is a responsibility being exercised here. And that is a responsibility that those principal officers of the government must come together and sit down with themselves and understand that this money is not like quote-unquote missing. We do just have an account reconciliation problem. We believe that CBN, you acted thinking because you did not have the information available to you. But we then have the information and we realize that we have a gap within how we reconcile and how we deal with our figures. And as such, these men are standing up and being responsible. But then we still can't have legitimate and should ask legitimate questions. For example, I've asked a couple myself here. If this money is in those places, how come the CBN does not know? 1. 2, How do we have a situation whereby it seemingly appears that the central bank does not understand the workings of the NNPC? 3, which other accounts does the NNPC operate that is not known to the central bank? Again, if you turn it on the other side and look at how NNPC operates, NNPC conducts its affairs in a way that is best known to him. You have a minister of petroleum who basically has to, and they report directly to who? The president. I think that between the two of them, Nigeria has just seen the challenge you have. Your biggest revenue earner and your central bank cannot even harmonize figures.
Let's talk about the PIB quickly here. You know, we've always talked about PIB with all of those anomalies and brouhaha concerning unremitted funds. Well, I think they were truly careful in using that word, unremitted, not that it was actually missing. Perhaps maybe it was hovering somewhere. But now that, well, we just realized that some of those funds hovering were actually kept somewhere or are actually sitting pretty cool somewhere. Would the PI bill have been able to solve all of these anomalies?
By the way, one other point which I did not mention is that, and which is the CBN would have to learn from it as well, is that there were some of those monies that were not necessarily, or some of those crude lifting that were not necessarily NNPCs. Do you understand? So legitimately, NNPC couldn't have been remitting money that was not due back to you. So NNPC couldn't have done that. The real argument why the PIB is being spoken about is that Nigeria's the level of accretion to the foreign exchange and to Nigeria's reserve is depleting. Nigeria's share of these oil transactions is actually dropping. Maybe you don't get the point very clearly. Nigeria's share of revenue for most of these oil transactions is actually dropping from the crude oil sales. That's a fundamental issue. And if you know that we moved away from, let me get it right, we moved away from joint ventures to production sharing arrangements. We moved into some actual different aspects of the oil gas, but the share of money coming to federal government because of the investment the other parties are making, our level of earnings is actually dropping. Let me break it down for you very well. Your level of contribution from your usual contracts which you're getting is dropping from the signed agreements. And so what we're hoping is that if you do a petroleum pass the PI bill, you may solve all, some of all these challenges, and then you then understand that you just at the level of collecting revenue. So you allow private sector participation to be in there, and you can stop all this. I didn't know who should do this, I didn't know who do that, because it's a very complex operation. And so what we're saying is, and I think one of the fallouts of what has gone on today is that it then brings to bear upon everybody that it is important that we deal with this oil business once and for all. The fact that we know that our revenue is dropping from this, maybe it's high time we start investing in focusing more on that gas and doing much more in terms of the gas output. Is it high time we start going into the shale gas production and understand what is going to happen? Again, you turn around and see, go back to 2012. Most of the contracts that were structured together was that the oil prices were going in Nigeria. So you had Tunji spoken about that. CBN was probably expecting more money. Are you following me? So then they raised the questions over there.
I was also going to ask you quickly, though. I mean, we should also be expecting in terms of transparency, because it also points to that. What are you looking to see as the years go by?
But it's a good development. Like I said, it's a good development. It's a good development that they've now told us where the money is. They've now told us where the transactions are. We can stay on it. You get what I'm saying? You can stay on it and ask for more information. For example, I raised 3 questions which we would like to stay on and to get more answers to. It is hopeful that we hope that before the year runs out, they will resolve where the 10.8 billion is, and then they will communicate back to you. But to your point as to that communication from the central bank, I feel that it just made matters worse rather than help it there.
Well, Femi Awoyemi, CEO, ProShare, many thanks for coming.
Thank you very much.